wake up to a screen, not the sun, not the breath of dawn, but a glow, artificial, addictive, immediate, notifications, headlines, updates, alerts, the pulse of the world, digital, endless, loud. And in that first moment of waking, something ancient inside me retreats, something still, something sacred, something that once whispered, remember who you are. But I scroll instead. This is the world we live in now, a world where silence is rare, where presence is a performance, and where even the spiritual path has become content. Meditation apps, Instagram monks, TikTok dharma. We consume enlightenment like we consume everything else, quickly, greedily, distractedly. And yet, the question burns, is real awakening still possible here? Can a mind soaked in noise ever remember the sound of silence? Can a heart numbed by endless dopamine ever feel the subtle rhythm of truth? I've heard it said, the modern world is too loud for awakening. There's too much distraction. We're too far gone. But I don't believe that, because the Dharma is not a museum piece. It's not a relic of ancient India. It's not a philosophy reserved for cave dwellers and monastics. It is a mirror, and that mirror still works, even if we're afraid to look. The problem is not the world, it's our relationship to it, our addiction to stimulation, our fear of stillness, our clinging to control. Enlightenment was never about escaping the world. It was about seeing through it, and that seeing, that piercing clarity is still available, even in traffic, even in grief, even with Wi-Fi. But it requires something brutal, something that our modern minds resist with everything they have, stopping, not slowing down, not relaxing, not taking a breath between emails, but stopping, letting the momentum crash, letting the mind collapse, letting the performance die. I don't mean quitting your job. I don't mean deleting your social media. I mean pausing radically, intentionally, consistently to remember what is always here, the breath, the body, the awareness behind the noise. That's where awakening hides, not in a monastery, not in a scripture, but in the space between notifications. So is enlightenment still possible? Yes, but not without a price. You must be willing to stand still while the world spins faster. You must be willing to be empty in a culture obsessed with more. And most of all, you must be willing to be silent in a world that screams. We romanticize the past, the quiet caves, the rustling forests, the monks with shaven heads and begging bowls. We think they had it easier, less noise, less pressure, more time, and maybe they did. But don't confuse stillness of the environment with stillness of the mind. Because even in ancient India, the real battle was never with the world, but with the self. People imagine the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, bathed in moonlight, serene and untouched. But that image is a lie. He sat in agony. He sat in fear. He sat in confrontation with everything he thought he was. And he didn't wait for perfect silence. He sat in the chaos of memory, of doubt, of desire, and only by not running from that chaos did he find freedom through it. This is the trap of the modern spiritual seeker, waiting for the right conditions. I'll meditate when life calms down. I'll go deeper once I have more time. I'll awaken once I go on retreat. But the conditions never come. There will always be noise. There will always be tasks. There will always be something else to do. The world will not wait for you to wake up, and it won't make it easier. That's not its job. That's yours. To carve silence in the middle of sirens, to find presence in the middle of pressure, to sit still even when your phone is buzzing and your mind is screaming for stimulation. People ask, can you really become enlightened in the city? Let me ask back, where else would it matter? In a monastery, maybe peace is easy, but in traffic, in heartbreak, in injustice, that's where awakening must bloom, or it's not worth anything at all. The perfect moment is a myth. So is the perfect place. So is the perfect you. There is only this moment, and your willingness to meet it, with eyes open, with heart still, with no guarantee of success, only the fire of honesty. Enlightenment doesn't wait for your schedule to clear. It arrives like lightning, or not at all, and your only task is to be standing when it does. Samsara is not a place, it's a pattern, a cycle of craving, clinging, and collapsing, birth and death, again and again inside the mind. And now we've digitized it. Scroll, like, click, swipe, each motion a grasp, each grasp a small rebirth. We chase novelty, pleasure, outrage. And just like in ancient samsara, we suffer when it fades. You don't need to believe in past lives to understand rebirth. Just open your phone. How many times have you died and been reborn today? Every app, a new incarnation. Every post, a new identity. Every opinion, a new self to defend. We rise in pride, fall in envy, burn in anger, numb in shame, and we call it connection. But connection without presence is just noise, and noise is the new veil. It covers us, it distracts us, it seduces us away from the one thing that truly liberates: silence. The Buddha taught us to break the wheel, not by running from life, but by seeing its mechanics clearly. So, what are the mechanics of digital samsara? Notification, craving, reaction, emptiness, repeat. The same ancient wheel, now updated for iOS. But here's the truth: technology is not the enemy, attachment is. Your phone is not the problem, your unconscious use of it is. You can scroll mindfully, you can click with awareness, you can use the internet as a mirror, not a mask. But it takes training and it takes practice, which is exactly what meditation is. You don't need to become a digital monk. You don't need to throw your phone into the ocean. You need to wake up while using it. Notice your craving, watch your reactions, feel your distractions, and don't judge them, see through them, because even inside a digital samsara, liberation is one breath away. Even with notifications buzzing, you can return to the body. Even with chaos online, you can find stillness within. That's the miracle of the Dharma. It works here too. There's a moment just before the phone vibrates, just before the email loads, just before the next thing demands your attention. A gap, a breath, a pause. And in that pause, something sacred waits. Most people never notice it. We rush from task to task, as if life is a treadmill that will throw us off if we slow down. But life isn't the treadmill, the mind is. And unless you learn to step off, even briefly, you'll miss the only thing that matters: presence. You don't need an hour of silence. You don't need a forest. You don't need a monastery. You need 10 seconds, 3 breaths, 1 moment of not reacting. The pause is a doorway, and meditation is the practice of entering it again and again. People imagine meditation as sitting cross-legged in perfect tranquility, but sometimes it's just choosing not to check your phone for 30 more seconds. Sometimes it's noticing the warmth of your tea before reading another headline about how the world is on fire. Sometimes it's feeling your feet on the ground instead of spiraling into anxiety about the future. These small moments, they matter because enlightenment doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It creeps in through the cracks, the quiet, the ordinary. If you can be awake in the grocery store, in traffic, while folding laundry, then you're not practicing Buddhism, you're living it. We underestimate the power of micro awakenings. That moment when you recognize a thought as just a thought, when you feel anger rise and let it pass, when you catch yourself rushing and stop. Each of these moments chips away at the illusion of the separate self. Each of these moments reminds you you are not your urgency. The modern world gives you thousands of chances to practice, Every buzz is a bell. Every delay is a teacher. Every irritation is an invitation to come back, to breathe, to see, not later, not tomorrow, but now. And isn't that what the Buddha meant when he spoke of mindfulness, not escaping the world, but entering it more fully, not avoiding pain, but meeting it without flinching, not seeking silence, but becoming it in the middle of everything? Write your questions in the comments. You give me a like and a follow. I'll give you an answer. I once met a man who said all the right things. He spoke of non attachment, of compassion, of present moment awareness. He quoted the sutras, referenced the Upanishads, wore robes and mala beads. He looked awake, but when I sat with him, truly sat, something was missing. Stillness, not the stillness of posture, but the stillness of being, the kind you can feel before a single word is spoken, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. This is the tragedy of modern spirituality. It has become a performance, not a path, not a surrender, but a brand. Aesthetic over insight, language over silence, content over transformation. We signal awakening, but avoid the death it demands. We talk about ego death without letting the ego die. We share quotes about emptiness while being full of ourselves, and we confuse inspiration with realization. The internet has amplified this. We curate our spiritual identity. We measure depth by followers. We validate presence with performance. But the Dharma is not a costume. It cannot be worn. It can only be dissolved into, and that process of dissolution is rarely photogenic. Enlightenment isn't pretty. It doesn't always look like peace. Sometimes it looks like collapse, like grief, like confusion, like everything you thought you were melting. And if your spiritual practice doesn't threaten your identity, it might just be decoration. But there's hope, always. The ego can mimic stillness, but it can't become it. So when you feel the itch to perform, pause. When you want to impress, breathe. When you find yourself posturing, return to the raw. No mask, no role, just this. The deepest awakening isn't seen by others. It happens in the dark, in silence, without applause. And when it's real, it doesn't need a stage, because truth is never performative. It just is. In ancient times, a bodhisattva vowed to return again and again until all beings were free, not out of obligation, but out of love, not because they had to, but because they saw no difference between themselves and the suffering of the world. But what does that vow look like now, when suffering hides behind screens, when confusion wears the mask of information, when loneliness screams beneath constant connection? Today's bodhisattva doesn't sit on a lotus. They sit in traffic. They sit in meetings. They sit in comment sections filled with hate. And still, they choose compassion. Still, they choose presence. Still, they choose to stay awake in a world that begs them to fall asleep. The modern bodhisattva doesn't wear robes. They wear whatever helps them blend in so they can reach those no one else can. They walk into boardrooms, into hospitals, into prisons, into social media feeds. They listen, they reflect, they don't preach. They simply radiate what they've realized, because the vow is not about saving others. It's about seeing clearly that there are no others, that your pain is not separate from theirs, that your awakening is not for you alone, that freedom, when hoarded, is no longer freedom. And in this digital age, the vow takes on new forms, responding to cruelty with stillness, offering truth without ego, logging off when that too is an act of compassion. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is not react, to not add more noise, to not fuel the fire, to not confuse drama with engagement. The bodhisattva doesn't try to fix the world. They hold it as it trembles, as it breaks, as it rebuilds. They offer their presence as an anchor in the storm, and they never say, I am enlightened, because that too would be separation. They simply live moment to moment as the vow itself, not as a title, not as an achievement, but as a response to suffering, to beauty, to now. We want to get better at work, at relationships, at peace, even at awakening. We turn spiritual growth into a project, a goal, a race, and in doing so, we smuggle the ego through the back door. Suddenly, you're tracking your meditations, comparing your depth to others, measuring your stillness like it's a trophy. You chase the next insight, the next retreat, the next level. But here's the truth: progress is not awakening. It can point to it, but it's not it, because awakening is not an achievement. It's the collapse of the achiever. The self that wants to be enlightened can never be enlightened. It's like a shadow trying to hold the sun, and yet we try. We try so hard. We read every book. We attend every talk. We meditate for hours, but always with a goal in mind. And that goal becomes the chain. Because as long as you're trying to become something, you haven't yet realized you already are. That's the paradox. The path requires effort, but the realization reveals that there was never anywhere to go. The moment you stop striving, not out of laziness, but out of clarity, a space opens, and in that space, truth reveals itself, not as a thunderbolt, not as a cosmic voice, but as silence, as simplicity, as this. The Buddha didn't awaken because he tried harder. He awakened because he stopped trying to become. He let go of even the desire to awaken. And in that letting go, awakening happened. In the modern world, we are obsessed with self improvement. But the Dharma is not self improvement, it's self erasure, not in a violent way, but in a liberating one, like wiping fog from a mirror, like waking from a dream. So if you find yourself striving too much, pause. If you feel like you're falling behind, pause. If you believe others are more advanced, pause. And remember, you're not behind. You're not broken. You're not becoming enlightened. You're remembering what you are beneath all the noise. The world is burning, literally, figuratively, spiritually. Fires rage across forests. Wars ignite across nations. Algorithms devour our attention. And loneliness, masked by connection, deepens every day. So, what does enlightenment mean now? Is it still relevant? Is it still possible? Or is it just a luxury for those who can afford to look away? There's a dangerous idea floating through the modern mind. If the world is falling apart, what's the point of waking up? But maybe, just maybe, that's exactly why we must. Because the world doesn't need more outrage, more division, more despair. It needs presence, clarity, stillness, not to ignore the fire, but to carry water into it. Enlightenment today is not about escaping to a mountain. It's about standing in the center of the chaos and refusing to be consumed by it. It's about seeing the madness without becoming mad, feeling the suffering without shutting down, and acting not from fear, but from freedom. We think awakening means detaching from the world, but the deepest realization is that there is no separation. Your breath is not separate from the air. Your mind is not separate from the culture. Your heart is not separate from the suffering of others. To awaken is to remember your responsibility, not out of guilt, but from compassion. So, what do we do in a world on fire? We do what the Buddha did. We sit under our own Bodhi tree, whatever form it takes. We face our inner demons, even if they wear the faces of politicians, parents, or social media. We stay present, we stay human, we stay awake, because the moment you awaken, even a little, you become a refuge, not for everyone, but maybe for one person, one soul drowning in noise who sees your silence and remembers their own. The world may burn, but the Dharma is not ashes. It is wind, it is water, it is seed. And your awakening is not the end of the fire, it's the beginning of rain. Thank you for staying awake with me.